Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Nicola, and for those of you who have only just come across me and my work, I am the founder of Too Much Social, and I am an Instagram strategist and educator for writers and authors. What that basically means is that I've been developing my knowledge and expertise in social media marketing since 2016. Initially, I spent some time building a personal Instagram account, which I grew to around 24K. It's currently dormant. I don't post on it at the moment in order to promote a blog. And then in 2017, I actually retrained as a social media manager for small businesses. Previous to that, I'd been a secondary school teacher for 12 years. For the last couple of years of my business, I've been focused on supporting writers and authors with using social media, primarily Instagram, although a lot of what I teach can be used across different platforms. Because I want to help you to reach more readers. And the reason why I made that pivot away from supporting small businesses to supporting people like you is basically because I love books, I love reading, I love stories, and I do write myself. I haven't yet been published. I hope that at some point in the future, that will happen, but it hasn't happened yet. But I do have a huge amount of personal passion for books and for writing. So the ways in which I can support writers vary. Obviously, you're here today for this free masterclass, and I do have other free resources available on my website, in my Substack newsletter, and on my Instagram account. I also offer one-to-one services and a monthly membership. So just a little heads up that somewhere in the middle of this masterclass, I am going to tell you a little bit more about my services just for a couple of minutes, as I've now been doing this kind of work for 2 years. So things are changing a little bit. And so when I send the recording, I'm also going to include a special offer for those of you who watch that recording. There'll be a special offer in the email because I'm relaunching some of my one-to-one services at the start of July. But with no further ado, let's get on with what you are here for, which is to find out more about the 10 Instagram habits for effective book marketing that every writer should cultivate. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this topic is because over the last 2 years, I've worked with, I tried to count and I sort of got bored of counting, but I think it's definitely over 150 writers and authors. And I've worked with those people in group workshops and one-to-one sessions, as well as in their monthly membership. And what I've noticed is that the writers and authors who use Instagram to make a real difference to their audience building and book marketing, they often share a similar set of habits. So in this masterclass, I'm going to walk you through 10 of those habits. I am going to explain what they are and the impact they can have, basically so that you can get a feel for what it takes to use Instagram to effectively find readers for and to promote your book. Because I think that very often what we think using Instagram means for us, that kind of like being like performing, isn't actually what it has to mean. So I want to reassure you that none of the people I had in mind when I was creating this masterclass have hours of spare time to dedicate to Instagram each day. None of them have high levels of skill in video creation or graphic design. And if I'm absolutely honest, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, none of them even have particularly exciting or glamorous lives that they can splash all over the internet. They live very normal lives. They are juggling other responsibilities. They have day jobs and children to look after. And they're coming at that Instagram book marketing very often, most often, from the position of being a beginner. But what they have got in common is that they've cultivated a set of habits that have meant that they've got real bang for their buck when it comes to the time and effort they've put into their Instagram. So they're getting some payoff from the time and effort that they're putting in. So some of these habits may be things that you do already. Others might be ones that you think, actually, I feel like that is something that I don't currently do, but I could do. So that is something that you could go away and cultivate for yourself. And some of them, I do want to acknowledge that some of them may not be for you. They may not be the kind of thing that you feel comfortable doing. So please, I really want you to take what you feel will work for you and leave the rest. Obviously, this is a very broad stroke masterclass rather than digging into the nitty gritty of you as an individual writer. But hopefully, everybody will walk away with something that you can start to work on and start to cultivate for yourselves. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to show you a, sorry, excuse me. I'm going to start showing you a presentation which will run through these 10 habits. I'm going to talk around each of these habits, and each of these habits also has kind of a little bit of homework. So if you are so minded, if you're so motivated, you can go away after the masterclass and you could actually do a task that will help you cultivate that habit. If you don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine. Okay, but they are on there. You can make notes now. You can watch it back later if you want to come back to some of those tasks. I will leave that with you to decide what suits you best. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Hopefully, I will just take my time because I know that sometimes this can make things glitch. Okay, so hopefully you should now be able to see something that is yellow on your screen. Let me just change that setting. Okay, so it should now fill up the whole of your screen, and hopefully you can see me in the corner somewhere. If you can't see it at any point, if things kind of get a little bit sticky, then do let me know. Just take yourself off mute and let me know, and I will reshare. Sometimes it helps if I stop sharing and then reshare the screen. Okay, so let me continue. So habit one of authors who effectively market their books on Instagram is that they begin with their own clear goal, agenda, and intentions when they are setting off, rather than unquestioningly following Instagram's lead. Because Instagram will have us all believing that we should be accumulating enormous numbers of followers and chasing views and likes in order to use it effectively. But rather than falling unquestioningly into following Instagram's agenda to get us doing that, I'd like to invite you to think about an alternative or alternatives to this. Now, one alternative might be that you think of your primary goal as being to sell books. And I understand the temptation of having that as your primary goal, because ultimately that is what you want to do, right? However, I would also advise against that being your primary goal for your Instagram account, as the relationship between social media followers and sales actually can be really difficult to track because of the ways in which users behave. They very rarely will just see a post and click through, and also because of the particulars of Instagram as a platform, which is that you can't put live links on your posts, so it makes it really hard to track whether your Instagram activity is directly leading to sales. So it can become really frustrating if that is your primary goal. But the other reason why I wouldn't advise having sales as a primary goal for your Instagram account is that I also think that thinking of your audience as a resource from which you're trying to extract something is actually a really quick way to make promoting your book feel really horrible. So what I see when writers and authors are using Instagram in a more sustainable and effective way that actually feels good to them is that they focus more on relational rather than transactional goals. Instagram often feels bad because it encourages us to quantify rather than qualify our relationships. So instead of looking at the numbers, what effective authors will do is they will get into the habit of thinking more about the experiences that they're having through the app, the connections they are making with other people, whether it be readers or other writers or other people in the area of expertise, especially if you're a nonfiction writer, that you are writing in. So, they're thinking about the conversations they're having, the support that they may be offering to other writers, and also the support that they receive in return. Those are the things they put at the center of their experience of Instagram, rather than looking at the number of transactions that are driven by their Instagram activity. So they think about how they can create a community of like-minded people around them, and how they might connect with people over shared interests or even shared experiences, and how they might participate in publicly supporting other creatives as well. So you might be thinking, well, all right, Nick, that sounds lovely. But publishers keep telling me that I need X number of followers. I mean, I say X because I've heard numbers from anything between 3,000 up to 100,000. So I'm not even going to pretend I know what kind of number of followers publishers think is necessary to get a book deal. Okay. So, but you might be thinking, well, this kind of relational way of using Instagram sounds lovely, but how do I get the followers that publishers are telling me to get if I'm just talking to the same people all the time and building my relationship with them? Well, this kind of relational agenda, if we call it that, that I see effective authors having on Instagram, it doesn't actually mean that your account won't grow. In my experience, the authors who use Instagram most effectively make it a clear intention to build a core community around them, because they can see that the long-term rewards of this are that those people will interact with your posts, so that the algorithms get the signals to show them to people who don't already follow you. And at some point, this core community of people will come out to bat for you. They are the people who are not only going to buy and read your book, they're also going to share your posts. They're going to review your book. They're going to recommend your book to their online and offline friends. So when you set your own agenda of using Instagram relationally rather than transactionally, it actually means you don't need a large audience of your own in order to reach a large number of people, because you can create this kind of ripple effect through your network. And it all begins with this core community that you've built around you. I really wish, and I write about this often, as some people who are on the masterclass today will tell you, who I know are more familiar with my work. I really wish the publishing industry understood this, and it is part of my mission to get them to understand how social media actually works, and that these raw numbers that they're so fixated on is not what they should be prioritizing. Because by prioritizing relationships, you can also use Instagram in a way that serves you and the human beings that are on the other side of the screen, rather than the robots, the algorithms. And that will make it way more sustainable for you. And by making it more sustainable and more pleasant an experience for you, and focusing on relationships with actual people, that also means you're more likely to keep showing up over time, which in turn means you're more likely to see the results that you want to see. So that's why I think that the authors who most effectively market their books on Instagram succeed. That's one of the habits they have, is they have and they keep hold of their own clear goal and agenda. And very often that involves centering relationships rather than the algorithms. So if you want to deepen your thinking into this idea about what your individual agenda for your Instagram account might be, and also how you might measure success using a different set of metrics than Instagram wants you to, then there is a free workshop called Write Your Own Instagram Manifesto on my website. It's an hour long, and it just leads you through a set of tasks that will hopefully lead you to a point where you can say, okay, this is the job I want my Instagram account to do. When I email out the recording of this masterclass to you, I will make sure that I include a link to that, but it is available on my website. Okay, so the next habit 2, of authors who effectively market their books on Instagram is that these authors are relentlessly consistent in their messaging and positioning for themselves and their books. I realize messaging and positioning are basically marketing jargon. So I am going to break it down for you. They're words that like we bandy around as though they make sense to everybody, but I realize, that not everybody lives in the marketing world. So let me explain what this means. What it means for you is that you need to be clear about what you want to be known for. You want to be clear, you need to be clear about who you would like to be compared to as a writer or an expert, and who also do you not want to be compared to. You need to be clear about which of your interests are you going to share with other people. You don't have to share everything. That is really important. But is there a way of you sharing some of your interests, which means that you can show up in an enthusiastic and personable way, which means it's more likely to make people want to join you on this journey? What subjects do you care about that you can share your enthusiasm for? Because please don't ever underestimate the power of enthusiasm. It really is infectious and goes a long way to engaging people in your work. So authors who effectively use Instagram for book promotion, they are the ones who step into their identity as an expert, or as an entertainer, or as a teacher, or as a guide, or as an artist, or as just somebody with a way of looking at the world that makes other people feel understood and seen. And they step into that identity with a degree of bravery. They are prepared to share their credentials, not just like formal qualifications, but their lived experiences and their journey. They're prepared to talk about what inspired them to write their book. And they're also prepared to talk about how they hope it will be transformative for their reader. Because, your book will be transformative for your readers. I want you to believe in that. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So this is another really important habit that effective book marketers, authors doing their book marketing on Instagram have, is that they really believe in their books. The transformation doesn't need to be, it can be fleeting, it can be a transformation from being bored to being entertained. Like, that is a transformation, and your book does have value. It is transformative. So when it comes to positioning your book, so thinking about this habit that effective authors have on Instagram, is that they're consistent in their messaging and positioning for their book as well as for themselves. Positioning your book means communicating to your potential readers what they can expect from your book. A little bit like how a movie trailer will communicate to the potential audience what that movie is going to be about. You can't just present people with a poster and the title of the movie and who's in it and expect to win them over so they're going to spend their money visiting the cinema or ordering it on a streaming service without telling them more about it. And I want you to think about some of your Instagram content as almost like trailers for your book. So positioning your book also means considering where it sits in the marketplace. If you walked into a bookshop, which other books would your book be on the same shelf as? Especially books that your potential readers might have already read or heard of. And you might even position your book by comparing it to TV shows or films. And for most writers, this concept is probably quite familiar to you, because if you are going down the traditional marketing route, you will probably have gone through or will be going through a process where you select some comparables so that agents or publishers or booksellers can understand where your book sits in the market. So this concept is one that you are probably already familiar with, that you can also apply to your Instagram content, because the people who are connecting with you on an individual level need to understand where your book sits in the market, what it is similar to, what it is different to, so that they can make a decision about whether your book is relevant to them. And the most effective authors on Instagram are constantly doing this. And let me tell you, when you get to the point that you're sick to death of yourself, about 10% of your audience will have half a clue that you've even written a book. So you have to keep repeating this messaging, because these topics are really fertile ground that you should keep coming back to in your Instagram posts. You can share posts around your thinking and therefore position yourself for your potential readers so they understand what they are going to get from you, the content on your Instagram account, and ultimately what they're going to get from your book. So, to deepen your thinking about the messaging and positioning of your book, I've got some kind of sentence starters here that you might complete to help you with that thinking. You don't have to complete these now, you can come back to these later. So, you could write me a sentence or a paragraph of explaining what your book or your writing explores. Maybe you talk about the problem it solves, or the question or questions it asks or answers. Like I said, the problem does not need to be a big problem. It can literally be, I need a book to read by the swimming pool on holiday that is going to be a little bit of escapism and a little bit of fun. That is the problem that your book solves for people. Or it can be a knowledge gap. So people want to learn something more, or it could be feeling alone with a problem. The problem your book is solved, the problems that books solve are multitudinous. I hope that's an actual word. I haven't just made that up. Okay, there are many of them. Another sentence that you might complete to deepen your thinking about the positioning and messaging around your book is to explain just to yourself, I am qualified to write about this because, and this could be formal qualification, or it could be lived experiences, things that you have gone through. And that goes just as much for fiction. Okay, when you are writing fiction, you are writing about relationships between people. So, what is it that you've lived through in your own life that means that you feel like you can understand people well enough that you're also able to fictionalize those experiences? You might have a reason why you are writing about that subject. So, another sentence starter that I've just realized I actually think I've missed off the slide, but I've got it on my notes, is that I am writing about this because. So explain, why are you writing about this? Also, I would like to be compared to, whether that's particular writers or particular books, and I would not like to be compared to, who might that be? And then also books that are similar to yours. And also, people might think my book is similar to this, but actually it is different in these ways, so you could dig a little bit deeper. Now, your answers to each of these questions should feature heavily in your Instagram content so that your potential reader can understand why your book is relevant to them. You can wrap your answers up in different packaging by using different formats and content types. So, you might answer one question in a reel and another question in a carousel and another question with a static image with a caption. You can pick from any of these content types, but the thing that I want you to take away is that the most effective authors on Instagram, when it comes to their book marketing, will repeat these ideas often. Okay. Habit 3. Authors who effectively market their books on Instagram are grounded in the value of their work and ideas. I've already alluded to this. Instagram is set up in a way that will have you thinking that likes and views and follow accounts are the things that validate your ideas or the quality of your work. And then if you don't get this validation, because it takes time to build that community around you who are going to interact with your content, it can quickly start to feel like there must be something wrong with you or your ideas or your book. And I want you to remember that that is not the role of Instagram. It doesn't get to decide whether your book is and your ideas are good. That is not the role of Instagram. But very often when we give it that power, it then makes us question the value of our books. And as a result, many authors also tell me that when you do talk about your books on Instagram, you also worry that you start to look desperate or needy, like you're saying you need people to buy your book. And that then means that self promotion starts to feel really sticky and vulnerable and, like you're begging. And it's just not a good feeling and it's not a nice place to be. It's also not accurate, okay? Because that's not what you're doing. And the reason why you're not doing that is because your book is not, you're not selling snake oil, you're not selling a con. Your book has intrinsic value. So one way of dealing with these really inconvenient and inaccurate feelings that can get in the way of you showing up on Instagram is to take a little bit of time to define the intrinsic value of your book before Instagram tries to do it. Okay. And rather than approaching book promotion from the standpoint of, I need you to buy this book, I want you to reframe it as, let me show you the value my book has. And authors who use Instagram most effectively to promote their books, they tend to return to this idea often. I've worked with clients who literally have it written down and keep it, pinned up above their desks. So when they start to get those really uncomfortable feelings around self-promotion, they can look at that definition of the value of their book and they go, no, I know that what I am essentially selling has value. And when they root themselves in that value, it then can be an effective reply to any voice in the back of your head that's kind of telling you that you're being needy or that you're looking desperate in some way. So it's just not true. It's just the tricks that our brain plays on us. So to deepen your thinking about this, if you find it difficult to define the value of your book, one exercise that you could try is to take a look at your own bookshelves and maybe try to define in it. You can write it down, you can just think about it. It's totally up to you how you access this. See if you can identify what each of those books that's on your bookshelf has added to your life. You'll probably discover that precious few books completely change your entire life, but you'll also discover that many, if not all, I don't know, it depends on whether you're the kind of person who gets rid of books that you didn't love or you just keep everything. But many books that are on your shelf, you will discover have perhaps lent us entertainment, have perhaps lent us beauty or awe, created awe in us at the beauty of the writing. However fleetingly, it doesn't need to be like a feeling that lingers for years, although sometimes that happens too. Other books may have taught you about something that, again, you may quickly forget, but for the time that you were learning it, it was joyful and it enriched your life in some way. And other books may have effects that are even less measurable. But when you look at that book and you think about your experience of reading it, you have a distinct feeling that that book has contributed in some way to your worldview, to your openness and curiosity to other people's experiences or other people's lives or learning something new. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you can do that for the books that are on your shelf, I'm looking up as I'm talking to you because some of my books are up here above my desk. And if you can look at the books that are surrounding you and identify the value that they have, then you should be able to do that for your own book too. And what I see constantly is that the authors who use Instagram most effectively, and actually who are just generally able to really back their own books, they have this habit of reminding themselves and reminding their readers or potential readers of what that value is. And they do that consistently and often. Okay, so habit 4 of authors who effectively market their books on Instagram is that they obsess, not forever, but initially at first, to make sure they get the understanding right. So they obsess over their ideal reader is, and they speak to them consistently in language that they will respond to about topics they are interested in. If you're an expert, one of the traps that I very often see nonfiction writers who are experts falling into with some of their content is that you use language that makes perfect sense to you and would make perfect sense to your peers in your field of expertise, but is far too, I don't know, high up the ladder of understanding for your generic Instagram audience, because those people are going to be curious, but they don't have the understanding. So you have to find the language that is going to help them understand where you're coming from. So sometimes it takes a little bit of testing and refining, and sometimes it means that you might have to break things down for people. But one of the first things lots of writers have to come to terms with is that not everyone is going to want to read your book, but many people will. Okay. And it's your content's job to find the people who will want to read it once they know it exists. So the most effective authors on Instagram figure out how to find and attract those people, the people who, once they know your book exists, they're definitely going to want to read it. And those are the people they focus on finding and attracting. They don't spend time worrying about what is actually the vast majority of people who rarely buy books or who never read in their genre. They're not trying to convince somebody who only reads horror to read romance. Okay, what they do is they hyper focus on the people who will want to buy their book once they know it exists. So to do this, it can be really helpful to think of your ideal reader. That's how I think of them, as your ideal reader, as one person rather than a group of people. And then think about what that one person is like and build your content around the idea of this one person. What will they be interested in? What will they worry about? What challenges might they be facing that you can um, talk about, have conversations about, that will resonate with them, that resonate with you. It's important that it's authentic to you as well. And for writers, you often have the advantage that your one person is often very similar to you, or perhaps to a version of you that existed in the past. It might be, somebody that you were 10 years ago and you wish that, and you're writing the book that you wish had existed when you were going through something. Okay. Or now that you are writing a book that you yourself to yourself and your own experiences. And it's also important that if you're not comfortable doing so, you don't actually have to position yourself as an expert on anything. You can acknowledge that you're speaking from lived experience only and that other people's experiences may be different. But if you are an expert, share some of those insights too. Those insights are the reason people are going to read your book. So you need to give them that trailer, that sense of what your book is going to be about by sharing some of those insights in your Instagram content. So it's important to think about, if you think about a Venn diagram, your content should sit in the sweet spot between what is authentic to you. If you imagine one circle, what is authentic to you, and what benefits your audience, overlapping that. And then your content sits in the overlapping bit. That's the sweet spot for your content. So don't worry that you will leave out or some of your potential readers who might not map onto this one person perfectly. Don't worry about that. Trust that your audience are adept at figuring out whether your book is going to be of interest to them or not, even if not all of your posts are relevant to them. There will be some people who every single one of your posts is speaking directly to them, and they are your most ideal reader. But there are other people where some of your content will speak to them, and you just have to trust those that the people viewing your content will be able to figure that out for themselves. They will be. Okay, they will be able to do that. So, to deepen your thinking, there is actually a workshop about exactly this. Again, it's an hour long, and this one is available through the Too Much Instagram monthly membership. So all members have access to this workshop. In it, I spend an hour guiding you through a series of tasks designed so that you can build a detailed picture of who your ideal reader is, so that you can then go away and create content that's going to attract them. And this workshop is an example of the resources members of Too Much Instagram have access to. So I'm just very quickly going to tell you a little bit more about membership before I move on to the next habit. In the membership, it is hosted on Substack, but you don't have to use the whole platform on Substack in order to access the membership, because everything is emailed to you. Members also, as well as having access to workshops like Define, members also have access to weekly online check-ins where you can share your posting plans for accountability, or you can also get some advice about what you're posting that week. You have access to fortnightly content create-along sessions when we come together and we create Instagram posts in company. And those sessions are really great for any of you who benefit from body doubling, or perhaps if you want some accountability, or you think it would be helpful to just make sure you ring fence some time each fortnight to make sure you are creating some posts. Every single month, I run an Ask Me Anything kind of office hours session where members can send me a question in advance, or they can come along and ask their question live. And in that session, I give really tailored, very specific, detailed answers to those questions. And then also every single month, you will receive resources such as banks of post ideas, other workshops like the Define workshop. I create tutorials showing you how you can do things like make reels. And I also run seasonal challenges that are hosted by me. So I kind of like cheerlead you, prepare you, and sort of train you up and cheerlead you along the way. And then we do the challenge. And the most recent one of those that I've run was the growth sprint, which a number of the members joined in with. So they challenged themselves to develop their strategies that they can use to grow their account. So if you're interested in the membership, it costs £12 a month, or if you pay the whole amount up front, you get a small discount. So it's £120 a year, and it's packed full of valuable resources and insights that will make, my members tell me that it makes using Instagram feel much more achievable and sustainable than it has been for them in the past. So that is what membership is. And, if you join now, you get access to an archive of resources from the last year. So I actually launched it about a year ago. And so now there is a whole year's worth of content there that you can use along with whatever I create in the future. Okay, so if you want to know more about the membership, then you can email me to ask me any questions. But I will put a link to the membership in the email that I send you along with the recording, so that you can have a little poke around to see what you get if you decide to join. All right, let's move on then with habit 5. So habit 5 is that authors who effectively market their books on Instagram have a plan. Now, I have a bit of an ambivalent relationship with planning. Planning is really important. However, I also think it's important to not impose a strict and rigid way of planning that everybody must follow. It's really important that you find your own way to a form of planning that works for you. Because for some of us, I know that if we over plan, it actually just squashes the life out of things for us. However, if we underplan, what I find is that authors without a plan will often kind of like hop from idea to idea without really thinking about whether it's relevant to your audience or to your book. And I see this a lot when people kind of chase trends and think they've got to join in with every single trend, otherwise they're missing out on an opportunity. But in fact, that trend isn't massively relevant to their book or their audience. So authors without a plan, I also think, often find promoting your books creatively like really taxing, really tiring, because when you arrive at Instagram feeling like you should be posting something, every day or however many times during a week, but you're not sure what you're going to do every time you open the app, that's exhausting. You've got enough on your plate without giving yourself that problem too. And I think that when you don't plan at all, you're probably way more likely to stop showing up when you're not sure what to post about. Having a plan will support you through those sticky patches, and they will make it much more likely that you show up consistently and sustainably. Think about how you approached writing your book and how difficult it would be to keep showing up to the page when you have no idea at all what you're going to be writing about that day. I know there's a lot of conversation in the writing community between pantsing and plotting, but I don't believe for a second you're showing up to the page and not having a clue. I mean, you know who your character is, you know what kind of person they are. You hopefully know that if you put them into a situation, then you're going to know how they would react and how they would behave. So there is some thinking has gone into it. Even if you're not sure exactly what's going to happen, you have got a plan of some sort. And the authors who use Instagram to market their books most effectively, they treat it in the same way. They make sure they've done some pre-thinking. They make sure they have an understanding of what lies behind their Instagram content before they open the app ready to create a post that day. But also, don't be too rigid with your plan. As like I said, that can squeeze the life out of what you do. Do sometimes give yourself permission to follow your curiosity or creative inspiration. If you suddenly have an idea of something that you want to post and you think it's going to resonate with your audience, but your plan says you're meant to be doing something different, I encourage you to follow the fun. If you have that feeling of spontaneous creative inspiration that you want to share with your audience, then share it and then come back to your plan. Your plan sort of sits in the background for you to return home to. It's like the North Star of your Instagram book marketing. And sometimes you might drift off course, but you always have it there waiting for you to come back to. So when we're thinking about planning, we very often make the mistake of thinking about it purely in terms of what am I going to post each day? But actually, creating a plan requires you to go much deeper than that into your into your reasons for being on Instagram and how you're going to use it. So these are questions that I would ask the authors who I work with one-to-one. We always work on questions, on answers to these questions before we even get to the kind of like daily posting plan or weekly posting plan. So what are your goals? What is your agenda? Think about what I talked about in Habit 1. Who are you and what is your book about? Again, think about your answers to the questions that I proposed to you in Habit 2. Who is your target audience? Who is your ideal reader that you are trying to reach? Okay, again, Habit 3. I've already talked about how effective writers identify, they obsess over who that target audience is before they even start thinking about individual post ideas. And then also, it's really important when you are making a plan that you think about how much time are you able to spend creating posts each week. Instead of setting an ideal number of posts, I always recommend that people set a time budget. If you, and that idea is that you decide how much time you have, whether it's an hour a week or 2 hours a week to create content, and you ring fence that time and spend it working on your Instagram content. Now, at the end of that time, let's say you have an hour, at the end of that time, if all you've created is one post, then that week you post one post. I mean, it's not ideal, but what it does is it stops you spiraling and feeling like Instagram is going to take over your life. Now, next week, you might consider whether there are post ideas that will take less time so that you can create more than one post in that hour. But set a time budget so it doesn't feel like it's taking over your life. That would be a major tip. When you're creating a plan, I also think you need to factor in how much time are you going to spend interacting with relevant people each day. You know, part of your Instagram activity should be talking to other people online who are other writers or who are in your niche or who are readers of your books or who may be bookstagrammers or other relevant people to your area of expertise, because that networking can pay off in the long run when your book actually comes out and those people are kind of, they are aware of you and you have a relationship with them, and they can then, they may then be willing to go out to bat for you and share your book with other people. And then think about how often are you going to post? You've got to weigh this up with how much time do you have to create the posts, but how often are you going to post? And how and when might you dial this up and down in order to reflect the rest of your life and what is going on in the rest of your life? For me, if it's the school holidays, I cannot spend as much time creating Instagram content as I might do during term time. So I have to dial it down. But during school holidays, while being aware that during term time, I also kind of have to dial it up if I'm going to achieve my goals. This is also the case for things like what stage are you at in your publication journey? So you may, if you're currently writing your first draft, you may sort of think, okay, I just want to keep things ticking over, so I'm just going to post twice a week, once or twice a week. But if you are in a period of time where you need to grow your account, you might need to dial that up and therefore increase the amount of time you are spending on it. And that is also true if you are kind of building momentum towards your book publication date. You probably want to be posting more often in the sort of last 2 or 3 months before your book comes out. And then in your plan, you need to establish, number 8, what themes or topics are you going to post about? We can sort of think of these as like content pillars. Some people call them content buckets. So what themes or topics are you going to post about that are specific to you, that are specific to your book as well, and specific to the interests of your audience? And only once you have done steps 1 through to 8, should you then be thinking about what are the individual posts that you are going to create and post each week. Okay. Very often people go in at number 9 and then get stuck because they haven't laid the foundations of 1 through to 8. Okay. And then number 10 is always keeping at the back of your mind who is already in your network that can become part of your network of digital surrogates that become particularly important when your book is coming out and you want to generate some momentum and some buzz about it. So have in the back of your mind, who are the people that you might collaborate with, that you might invite to guest post or to do an Instagram live with, or you create some content that they post on their account that's going to be useful to their audience. Build that into your planning, that awareness of who those people are, build it into your planning. Now, when I start working with authors one-to-one, their priority is often to come up with a posting plan that will help them launch their book or build their audience to strengthen a book proposal. And what they quickly realize is that if you're going to create a posting plan that will actually work and will be manageable for you as an individual and will fit in alongside your life, there's a whole host of other things that have to be factored in, as you can see on this slide. And the answers to those questions are different for every single author and every single book, which is where the strength of working one-to-one with someone like me is that together we can co-create an approach to Instagram that really works for the individual author, because it isn't a case of taking a one-size-fits-all strategy and shoving it on top of who you are and who your reader is and what the book is about. It should be a really kind of like iterative process, a step-by-step puzzle that we're putting together that makes use of feedback that you get back from your Instagram audience, in the way that they interact with your content. And also the data that you get from yourself. How does this feel? What is your experience of doing things in this way? What is your experience of posting something about that topic? That should be factored into the process, the planning process too. So very quickly, at the beginning of July, I am going to be relaunching my one-to-one services. I've now been working with authors and writers for 2 years, and along the way, I've tried different formats of services, and I think that I now feel very confident about what you need from me when you work one-to-one with me. Depending on who you are and what stage of your journey you're at, different people need different things. And I feel like I've got a really good handle on this now. So I know what you need from me, and I also know how I can do my best work. So at the beginning of July, I am going to be relaunching my one-to-one offers. So any of you who are already working one-to-one with me may see some changes to the packages that I'm offering new clients. There will be no changes for you. Hopefully you already know that, because I have actually told you. But just in case you're watching and wondering, okay, there's going to be no changes for existing clients. But for anybody who joins me afresh from the beginning of July, you will come into these new packages. I'm going to be saying more about that from the 1st of July. But I just wanted to let you know that if you book in for one-to-one services before the end of July, then I am also going to give you a bonus, which is membership of the Too Much Instagram membership for the duration of how long we work together. So if we work together for 6 months, you get 6 months membership. If we work together for 3 months, you get 3 months membership. So you will get that on top of whatever service you sign up for. That's the word I'm looking for. Whichever service you sign up for, you'll also get that additional extra. So, if you are interested in that, then please do drop me an email. Again, I will include a link in the email with the recording, so you can book a free 30-minute discovery call if you want to know more about my one-to-one services. And let's move on. Habit 6. Let me check the time. Where are we up to? Okay, I need to speed up a bit if we're going to have time to answer some questions at the end. So, habit 6. Authors who effectively market their books on Instagram leverage what you're good at and are prepared to learn new skills. So you are on Instagram to connect with people who will be interested in reading your book. You're not there to convince people who are not going to be interested in your book to read it, okay? Who are already interested in reading your book. They will not expect you to have slick video editing skills. They won't expect you, unless your book is a photography book, they're not going to even expect you to take stunning photographs. So I want you to lower the bar of what you expect your Instagram content to look like. What readers want to know about the authors that they are engaging with is they want to know, they want to feel like they know a little bit about you as a person. They want to maybe feel like they can relate to you, like they want to feel reassured that you understand kind of where they're coming from, or you can empathize with how they feel. They might also want to feel like they're learning something from you or are being supported by you in some way. It all depends on the kind of niche or subject matter of your book. But the point is that you can create this feeling on Instagram by leveraging a skill that you already have that you already demonstrate in your books and writing, which is telling stories. I am giving you permission to stop seeing content as something completely separate from your books or your writing. Yes, you have to package it differently because you've got these weird little rectangles on the screen of your phone rather than a paperback book. But if you use your book and the contents of your book as a framework for your content, then that can make creating your Instagram content feel much more aligned and make it much more effective at doing the thing you want it to do, which is appeal to the people who are going to want to read your book. So this does not need to be complicated, but the authors who use Instagram most effectively do make an effort to develop some new skills. It is 2025, and sadly, the days of single images combined with a caption being enough to stop people from just scrolling past, those days are long gone. So the most effective authors, they do leverage their storytelling skills, but they also challenge themselves to learn how to create simple videos or how to add text to a post, or they push themselves out of their comfort zone to appear live with a fellow writer or expert so that you can share your expertise with one another's audiences. You can piggyback on one another's audiences. Now, don't panic. None of these authors do this all at once in 1 week or even in 1 month. What they do though is they slowly, step by step, each day or each week or each month, they do the next small thing that they know will develop their skills and elevate their content. And in that way, they make it much more likely that their content will reach their readers. So it's not a case of starting from a place where you're an expert in all of the levers and buttons and bells and whistles that Instagram has to offer. But what you do need to do is you need to let go of perfection and embrace being a beginner. And that is a habit that I see most of the authors who use Instagram most effectively, that is a habit that they get themselves into. So you could start by doing this task. You could start by making 2 lists. The first list could be things that you know how to do on Instagram. Maybe you know how to reply to comments. Maybe you know how to comment underneath somebody else's post. Maybe you know how to send someone a DM. Maybe you know how to create a simple post from an image and a caption. And then make a list of things you don't know how to do on Instagram. But really importantly, break the items on list 2 especially into small steps. So rather than saying, I don't know how to make reels, break that down. When you look at reels on Instagram and you see what other people are doing with their reels, and I encourage you to go and look at other authors and how they are creating content. You wouldn't sit down and try to write a book if you've never read a book. And it's the same on Instagram. This is not about copying people. It is about widening your frame of reference and seeing what is possible. So go and have a look at how other authors are creating their reels, and then use that as information about what you don't yet know how to do. So maybe you see a reel and you think, okay, well, I don't know how to add text to a reel. Or maybe you know how to add text, but you don't know how to make text appear and disappear. Or maybe you know how to upload a video, but you don't know how to add music to it. And then each week, choose one thing from list 2 that you're going to focus on building into your posts, building into your activity. And then you can move it from list 2 to list 1. And over time, your fluency and proficiency will increase, and things that used to completely flummox you or used to take you ages, they will start to feel like second nature. I often describe it as being a bit like driving, learning to drive, because when you start, you've got the gear stick, you've got the indicators, you've got your headlights, you've got your steering wheel, you've got your pedals, you've got other drivers and cyclists and pedestrians doing whatever they're doing. And it can feel completely overwhelming to remember, what your eyeballs and your feet and your hands should be doing all at the same time. And yet, sooner or later, most of us who go and learn how to drive, sooner or later, we do actually pass our test. So Instagram's a little bit like that. Like, you have to build things in slowly, and move things from a list of what I can't do to a list of, oh, I now can do that. And that is something that most effective authors on Instagram are willing to do. They don't try to do everything straight away, but they do set themselves the challenge of slowly developing new skills. Habit 7. Authors who effectively market their books on Instagram are willing, and this actually fits in with that kind of like building new skills thing, they are willing to try and fail, test and refine. And even more scarily, because I know this is a big thing for a lot of people, never mind just authors and writers, just people in general. The authors who most effectively market their books on Instagram are willing to try and fail publicly, which is terrifying. Okay. I realize that, self promotion can trigger these deep psychological pressures. And it's often the case that writers who come and work with me one to one start off thinking that what they need is just that posting plan, those post ideas, or maybe they need kind of like an upgrade in Instagram tactics. They sort of understand the basics, but they want to elevate what they're doing. But what very often comes out in the wash is they quickly realize that Instagram actually has this horrible habit of magnifying other stuff that they've got going on in the background. And this and what tends to come out of the woodwork are these sort of like internalized narratives about what it means to self-promote. What does it mean to be more visible? What does it mean to take up more space and vocalize more opinions publicly? All of that stuff can feel terrifying, especially when we've been conditioned. And I think this is especially true for women, and especially women of perhaps, I don't know, maybe like millennial generation and older. I don't know how the Gen Zers are feeling about this. They often seem a lot more comfortable with it than the rest of us. But there is this feeling that we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to publicly claim space. Okay, stop going on about yourself. So all of this gets us all knotted up about being very visible and trying and failing publicly. Another thing that gets us all knotted up about that is that very often there's this creeping fear, this sort of like in the background, that, and I've talked about this a few minutes ago, that the popularity of your Instagram content is somehow a reflection on the quality of your work or your ideas or your book. And what I see is that the authors who use Instagram most effectively, they're very good at keeping it in its place. Because the fact is that it takes time to understand what will work for you, what will work for your audience, what will work for your book on social media and on Instagram. So it's really important to ground yourself in the knowledge that not everything will work, but everything is data. It is information that you can use to make future things work. And most importantly, the performance of your Instagram post or posts, whether it's good or whether it's bad, is not an accurate reflection of the quality of your ideas or of your writing. I mean, this conflation of credibility and audience size terrifies me. It's your sense of self-worth to Instagram. because it will, if you do, it will chew you up and spit you out, and it won't even give you a second thought, because it can do funny things to our feelings. But if you can stay rooted in the value of your work, I talked about that earlier in one of the other habits, and you can kind of roll with these Instagram punchies where sometimes you put a post out and it flops. Over time, you will start to see trends and patterns about what gets your audience chatting in the comments, what content generates likes, what motivates people to share your posts, and also what is total tumbleweed. And you'll start to notice as well, and this is super important for any level of sustainability when it comes to Instagram, you will start to notice, if you try and fail and test and refine, you will start to notice what content you enjoy making and what makes you feel a bit weird. You know, that is also important data that you should not ignore. Now, you can't collect this data if you avoid posting because you're worried it won't work. So it's a process. It's not something that you might find easy to step into, but getting or working on being more comfortable with the idea that what you post may not work is so important, for the long-term impact of your Instagram presence. So, as a task to help you deepen your thinking about this, I want you to look at anything you've posted over the last 30 to 90 days, and I want you to make 2 lists. If you post often, look at the last 30 days. If you don't post very often, then maybe look at the last 90 days. So I want you to look at, which are the posts that performed better than is usual for your content. So don't compare yourself to other people, compare yourself to your benchmarks. And what are the posts that performed worse than is usual for your content? And then compare the two lists. What's in list 1? Do those posts have anything in common with each other? Look at list 2. Do those posts have anything in common with each other? And in particular, when you're looking at list 1, so the posts that performed better than is usual for your content, could you repurpose some of those ideas? Could you use some of those ideas again? Just quickly, there are stacks of stuff in the Too Much Instagram membership about repurposing, because I so strongly believe that it is a really important tool for you to have in your toolkit, because it saves you time mostly. That's the main reason, is that we all have a very limited amount of time. Okay, moving on. Habit 8. Authors who effectively market their books on Instagram are consistent over time, but don't forget to take breaks. And I've included an image here because I just want us to bear in mind that consistency looks different for everybody. And very often we can think that consistency has to mean the same thing for everyone. Okay, but actually I find this image really useful. So you have to decide what consistent looks like for you. Now, there is so much talk about going viral and your account blowing up on Instagram that I think it sometimes escapes us that the reality for most people is actually really steady and incremental progress over time, including me. Like, I don't go viral with my content, but my account grows steadily and incrementally over time, and it does the job that I need it to do as a result of that. So spare yourself a whole heap of resentment and frustration by stashing this fact somewhere in your brain that most people are not going viral and seeing their accounts blow up overnight. Most people are plugging away at what they do, and that can be very effective. Authors who use Instagram most effectively understand that progress needs to be measured over a longer timeline as well than a few weeks or even a few months. Because what I would like you to understand is that what you are building when you do this is something that will outlast the book that you're working on now. It is not just about now and this book, it's also about later and future books, because readers don't tend to have loyalty to their publishers. So even if your publisher, you don't publish again with that same publisher, those readers won't, even if those readers are not going to go and follow that publisher to see what that publisher is doing, what they're going to do is follow you to see what you're doing. They have loyalty to you. And if you can create an Instagram account as kind of this hub around which you create a community where your readers feel like they have invested in you and they feel connected to you in some way. I don't mean like best mates, okay? But they do feel connected to you in some way. They're way more likely to stick around and buy your next book as well as the current one. But importantly, all right, consistency doesn't mean just plowing on relentlessly, okay? It also means taking breaks. It isn't about being perfect and doing it the same way every single time. It's about showing up regularly, even when it's challenging. And consistency really is about small, regularly repeatable habits that accumulate over time. And it factors in times to rest and recuperate because you are not a robot. And the authors who use Instagram most effectively are super consistent, but they're also realistic about their capacity and they factor in other demands on their time. So this is where that planning piece is really important. So you know when you can afford to spend more time on your Instagram activity and when you should also give yourself permission to step away. Okay. So authors often tell me, so there's another reason why you should take breaks. It's that when you take a break, what you tell me is that when there is intention behind that break and intention behind your return after that break, you also often find you return with fresh ideas and greater enthusiasm because you haven't forced yourself to just muscle through. So there has to be this balancing act between showing up consistently while respecting your capacity and making sure that you take breaks when you can and when you should. So to deepen your thinking, you need to consider, are there periods of time when you might dial down your activity? I've already mentioned that for me, that is certainly during the school holidays. Are there periods of time when you might dial up your activity because maybe you have just a little bit more flexibility with your time? But also factor in what stage of publication are you at and how big a priority is your marketing right now? Because you can dial up and dial down at different points during that cycle. With that in mind, I have a free to read post that is about posting volumes at different points during the publication cycle that I will put the link to in the email that I send you after this masterclass. So if you're curious about that, you can have a look. Okay, moving swiftly on so that we have 5 minutes maybe at the end for a few questions if there are any. Habit 9, authors who effectively market their books on Instagram challenge their own assumptions about what it means to use Instagram. In my experience, there are so many narratives that we carry around in our heads about what it means to use Instagram to promote our work. I'm going to just list a few of the most common ones that I hear, but I'm also going to tell you how the authors that I work with who are most effective, how they reframe them or have reframed them in the past. So one of the classic ones is everyone's going to get sick of me posting all the time about my book. Okay, so first of all, if you form the habit of posting content that is interesting to your audience, as well as content that's sort of just telling them about your book, this won't even be true because they are getting something of value to them. But you may still feel like everyone is seeing all of your posts and they're seeing them in order, and therefore you're going to be annoying them. But I can promise you that isn't happening. That is not how Instagram works. So to give you some benchmarks to work from, if a post does really well, it will probably be seen by around a third of your audience. More typically, and this is across the board, okay, so it's not depressing, it's just a fact, that post will be seen by 10% of your audience, okay? So hardly anybody is seeing every single one of your posts. So don't let that narrative of everyone's going to get sick of me posting all the time about my book get in your way. And it's also why it's so important to repeat yourself. And you can do that without feeling like you're annoying everyone. Another narrative, another assumption that people bring with them when they start to work with Instagram is they think everyone's going to think I'm big-headed if I talk about my book. Well, are they? Is that your attitude to people who you see talking about something that they've created? Do you think they're big-headed? Or do you think, oh, good for them, they've created this thing and they're proud of it and they want people to know about it? And also, are they too busy worrying about their own lives to spend more than a few seconds thinking about you? As painful as that might be, we think about ourselves way more than other people think about us. And even if some people do form this opinion of you, oh, she's so big headed, look at her, like, who does she think she is? As unpleasant as that is, and I know there are people out there who do that, what I would ask you is, are those the people you're going to let decide how many readers you reach? Because the people who think and say those kinds of things, they're not saying it. It's not actually about you. It's about how you are making them feel about themselves. And then they feel this need to belittle or demean the things that you are doing because you're by stepping out of your box and by talking about something you've created, they feel bad. So they're trying to make you feel bad. Okay. So are you going to let those people decide for you how many readers you reach? And I know that's a challenge to reframe it in that way. And you may have to reframe it in that way every single time you post. But I really think it's a bit of a muscle. And the more you do that, the easier it gets. So, okay, moving on. Another assumption that people often bring with them about what it means to Instagram is that, well, it must mean that my book's rubbish if I've got to promote it for myself, because surely if it was any good, it would find its own way to its readers. Okay, that's another thing or another fear that people have. And I think this is because most people don't have any idea how difficult it is to sell books or how little marketing support most authors get. Um, and if that is a fear of yours, how would it feel to publicly acknowledge that, to talk about in your content your experience of publishing your book and how vulnerability inducing it is to essentially like stand on a soapbox and talk about this thing that you have created? You know, that is a really personal way of bringing people on the journey with you. That doesn't mean that you are sharing your private life. All right, that is a way of being personal by talking about your experience of publishing your book. And it also kind of is interesting to people because it demystifies the publishing industry. Most people, most of your readers won't have a clue that most writers don't get any marketing support. And also, a little bit brutally, if you don't promote it, who will? You're probably not going to thank me for saying this, but the truth is, you are going to have to be your book's biggest cheerleader. Okay. You may get support from other people. You will hopefully get support from your network. But you have to be your book's biggest cheerleader. Another narrative is, I'm out of my depth and there's too much to learn. Okay. Are you, though? I want you to think about another time you've been a beginner and you've learned new skills. Remember what I said about letting go of perfection and just doing what you can, making a start. I have a few more narratives that I'm just going to skip over because they're not the most important ones. Because I just want to move on to this to deepen your thinking. So, what are the narratives that stop you from showing up on Instagram? Can you identify them? And if one of your friends had the same worry, how would you reassure them? And I'd like to extend a little offer to you. If you're stuck with a narrative that's stopping you from showing up on Instagram after this workshop, you can email me with what that assumption is, or that story that you're telling yourself about what it means to promote your book or what it means to show up on Instagram. And I will do my best to offer you a reframe. I hear these narratives so often from writers that it's very, very rare that people surprise me these days. I mean, maybe you will, maybe you'll surprise me. I don't know. But that's a little offer for you. If you want to email me an assumption or a story that you tell yourself about showing up on Instagram, then I will offer you a reframe. So habit 10, Authors who effectively market their books on Instagram cultivate radical acceptance. I love this idea of radical acceptance, and I only recently came across this term to describe it. And if you're not sure about what radical acceptance is, I like this definition that's from someone called Anna Ray. And she wrote this definition, and she actually quotes from somebody else as well in here, in an essay called On Radical Acceptance and the Art of Sitting with What Is. And she says, radical acceptance means fully acknowledging reality as it is, without denial, resistance, or protest, even when it's painful, unfair, or not what you wanted. It's about saying, this is what's happening and I might not like it, but I will stop fighting it. This bit's really important, I think. It's not about giving up. It's not about approving or condoning what happened or what is happening. It's about letting go of the internal war that costs us a lot of time and energy with what should have been. And I see this a lot with books and marketing where publishers are not giving writers the support they need. And the writer is in this internal war with what should have been and the support they feel like they should have been given. So here's a way to think about it, Anna Ray says, and she quotes from the Mind's Journal. Radical acceptance means that you have stopped fighting with reality and throwing fits about what has happened. You have decided to acknowledge and accept it instead. Once you do this, you may feel intense sadness because you have now given up on all hope of a better past or a better outcome currently. At the same time, you may also feel great relief because now you can finally let go of the fight over what should have been and deal more effectively with what's in front of you as it is. Now, many writers that I speak to are resistant to the idea of participating in your own marketing because you feel like it's unfair to ask this extra labor especially because it's unpaid, of authors. And I totally back you on those feelings of injustice. I think they are legitimate. Now, some of you, and while it's never been the case that quite as many publishers as you might think have been batting for all of their authors, you are right if you have the sense that there is this expectation and an assumption that most writers and authors are going to do an awful lot of heavy lifting with basically no support at all. And like I said, I totally understand your resistance to this idea. And some of you might even feel like involving yourself in this kind of like grubbier work of promotion and sales might feel like an affront to your identity as a writer or as a creative. And that can then get in the way, that can then make you feel resistant to this idea of marketing your own work. And when I have conversations with many authors and writers, those conversations around this sense of resistance have got me thinking that maybe publishing a book is actually less an act of creation and birth and more an act of loss. And with it, as described in that quote there, as an intense sadness, and I've described it in the past as kind of like almost a sense of grief for what you thought it was going to be like. Because there is so much about publishing that is a massive letdown very often for authors and writers. You may have dreamed since childhood of the moment that you'd hold that book baby in your hands for the first time, or you see it on the shelves of your local bookshop. And you certainly, no matter who you are, have spent years pouring yourselves into this project. So sometimes marketing and that expectation for you to do some of your marketing might be where some of this grief of this is not how I thought it was going to be pops out, because it feels like such a stark example of the disconnect between the dream and the reality. And and it really helps that you can hardly ever open the internet before someone tells you how bad it is for us. So our feelings about having to use social media to find our readers for ourselves very often are validated by so much of what we read on the internet. But like all grief, if you don't mind me using that word to describe this, okay, or maybe intense sadness is a better phrase, dealing with it is a process. And it probably won't ever disappear entirely, but you can learn to exist alongside it without it becoming or remaining all consuming and getting in the way of you dealing more effectively with what's in front of you as it is. So, what this means for you is that if you're going to use Instagram effectively for marketing your book, you may have to let go of how you thought it was going to be, or even what you think it should be like, and maybe even let go of that sense of unfairness that exists around you doing the work that you feel like your publisher should be doing for you. You have to let go of that ideal that you had in your head and kind of get used to doing what you can and make peace with this version of your book marketing. And what this might look like for you is creating a clear delineation between what is your publisher's role and what is your role in your book's marketing. You know, you might not be able to set up your own Amazon page correctly with all the metadata you need, but your publisher can do that. And you probably won't be able to pitch your book directly to bookshops or bookshop chains, but your publisher can. Meanwhile, you can use Instagram to post content that builds this community of people who are ready to buy your book, and also tell all their friends about it. Or you could use your Instagram account to become known for speaking about certain topics. So you become someone other people want to interview on Instagram, on podcasts, in print media, or for digital media, you know, things, outlets like Substack. And honestly, if you're listening to me and thinking, oh, I don't want to do it though, Nick, and you've not convinced me that I can, to be completely honest, you don't have to do it, okay? But part of radical acceptance is if you don't, if you don't want to do it and you're not going to do it, whatever choice you make, you have to accept that that choice comes at a cost. So deciding to invest time and energy in your book marketing will cost you time and energy. For a period of time, it will take you away from other things that you might prefer to be doing. Not entirely, but it will use some of that time up. And that is the cost. But deciding not to invest time and energy in your book marketing, especially in the absence of significant efforts from your publishers, because some people get enough support from their publishers that their efforts make no difference. But if you're in a position where your publishers are not investing time and energy into your book marketing and you decide not to invest time and energy in it too, you have to accept that that will probably affect your book sales. And I can't decide for you which cost you are more prepared to pay. That is a decision only you can make. For most people, most of the time, there is no perfect solution. And the energy you might currently be plowing into resisting the reality of the situation that you're in, or the time you spend waiting for the perfect solution to present itself, could be time and energy you spend on taking actions, even if they're small actions that accumulate over time and make a difference. The authors who use Instagram most effectively for their book marketing are the ones who acquiesce to what one of my clients, Leah Hazard, described as an ego death. So, which means letting go of the fight and dealing with what is in front of you rather than wasting time on what you wish was in front of you. And that brings me to the end of this presentation into the kinds of habits that writers and authors who most effectively use Instagram are demonstrating. These are the habits that they have cultivated. Just on this slide right here, where you can find me if you don't already follow me on Instagram, where you can find my website and also my email address. And when I finish this call in a few minutes, I will be sending you all an email with the recording of this workshop. Now, I just have a couple of minutes. I'm just going to make a couple of minutes available for me to have a look at the chat and see. Lots of you introduced yourself, which is lovely. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Kat. I just spotted your comment about you that you love being in the TMI membership. I appreciate that. I'm just stopping sharing, so hopefully you can now see my face. All right, so I don't think there are currently any questions in here. A couple of people sort of saying that it feels lots of food for thought, clear and doable. So if anybody just has any questions that you do want to ask before we end there, now is your chance. Oh, a couple of questions popping in here at the bottom. Oh, you're welcome, Judy. You're welcome. Nicola, you've asked, do you have thoughts on how Instagram works with other platforms? Yes, definitely. When it comes to other platforms, so Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Threads, Substack, the way in which Instagram will interact with those other platforms, obviously it varies from platform to platform. As a quick rule of thumb, Facebook is, I think Facebook, having it interacting with Facebook is great, especially if you want to do paid ads. If you are doing paid ad, if you are not doing paid ads and purely using it organically, Facebook is really tough to get organic reach. So I don't think there's much, unless you're using paid ads, I don't think the interplay between Instagram and Facebook is particularly great. Instagram and Substack work really well together. Quite a lot of people will use Substack to write a long form piece and then use the long form piece as kind of like source content to create their Instagram posts from, and then use their Instagram account to drive people to their Substack, to drive signups to their Substack. So they work quite, I do think Instagram and Substack work quite neatly together. And those are two platforms that I use in tandem. Instagram and LinkedIn, you can take your Instagram posts and you can use the captions to your Instagram as LinkedIn posts. You can use any graphics that you create as a LinkedIn post. They need tweaking slightly. I am a big fan of repurposing content across multiple places. But if you are just setting out or your time is limited, my advice is always to stick with one platform and do one platform really well, rather than spreading yourself too thin and then finding that none of your platforms are really working very well for you. To choose your platforms, the ones that are most relevant to you, you need to think about, well, what are you posting about? What is your book about? And who is your audience and where are they hanging out? So if your book is kind of more expertise led and maybe more business oriented, LinkedIn makes perfect sense. But if your book is about motherhood, Instagram is, it's got a huge, very active community, and lots of mums are just using Instagram to scroll and find entertainment and escapism or resources or whatever it is in lots of different ways. So it very much depends on what you're writing about, who your audience is, and that determines which of the platforms are going to be most relevant to you. And the final thing that should determine which of the platforms is most relevant to you is how you operate. If you are somebody who works really well with a tiny amount of text and you're great at being pithy and witty and funny, Threads or Blue Sky, I mean, maybe X, but we all know how toxic, what a bin fire X is these days. I can see Nicola shaking her head. Not X. Okay, but if that's more your vibe, where you're happier just like with text-based stuff, then those platforms might be a better home for you. But if you are somebody who wants a variety of different content placements to take advantage of, Instagram is fantastic because you've got video, you've got photography, you can post graphics, things that you might make on Canva, and even within Instagram itself, you can now put text over a photograph. So if that is a content placement that you think would work for you, then Instagram might be a good option for you. And if pure video is, you love making videos, maybe TikTok is the right platform for you. And actually, I should say that, a lot of video first people, so if you're an author and writer who's creating video, TikTok and Instagram, you can post the same video to both TikTok and Instagram, and not with very little effort, possibly reach two different audiences. So yeah, there are definite options for using more than one platform in tandem. Proceed with caution, depending on what your capacity is. Maybe nail down your strategy on one platform first before you diversify into others. And bear in mind where your core audience is hanging out, and make that part of your decision making as well. I hope that helps, Nicola. I realise that was a long answer to a short question. If anybody else has any questions then before we finish, I've got sort of 1 more minute before I have to dive off and dash out of the door to get to my son's assembly. I'm happy to answer. Okay, well, I'm going to end it there. I would like to thank you all for coming along. If there is anything you would like to ask me about in terms of my one-to-one services or the membership, then please do drop me an email. There's also that opportunity that I mentioned in there, that if you have a little nagging narrative at the back of your head that is stopping you from showing up, then please do send me an email, and I am happy to get back to you with what I hope will be a helpful reframe. But in the meantime, perhaps I will see some of you across the internet somewhere, and all the best of luck with whatever book promotion and audience building you are getting on with. And have a lovely rest of the day, everybody. The sun is shining outside, so I'm looking forward to getting outside and getting some fresh air, and I hope you get to do that too. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. Bye bye. Take care.